Okay, good afternoon and thank you for being here. My name is Kelly O'Donnell and I'm an Interdisciplinary Studies student focusing on French and creative writing. I would like to begin by thanking my advisors who couldn't be here today, but Dr. Zachariah Petit from Modern Languages and Linguistics, Dr. Nicole Pekarsky from English, and then my INDS advisors, Carrie Sauter and Patricia Lanu, and actually everybody on the INDS faculty and staff for supporting interdisciplinary studies and its students in every aspect of their time here at the university. This is my daughter Esme. Knowing my passion for French, a friend of mine bought us a copy of The Cat in the Hat in both English and French. I'd like to begin by reading you the opening passage. The sun did not shine, it was too wet to play, so we sat in the house all that cold, cold, wet day. Here's the same passage translated into French by Jean Vallier. Le soleil ne brillait pas et c'était trop mouillé pour aller jouer. Alors nous sommes restés assis à la maison pendant toute cette journée froide et humide. The meaning between the two texts is the same. The sun's not out, it's wet outside, the children are stuck in the house. But the rhyme, the cadence, and the fluidity of Dr. Seuss's original text is missing. So this presents the question, could this text have been translated so as to include the stylistic elements of rhyme and meter that are Dr. Seuss's hallmark? Perhaps, but let me expand on that even more. Could this text have been written originally in French? What features of the English language gave Dr. Seuss the means to write this exact text? This is not to suggest that a similar text featuring the same features of rhyme and the sing-song rhythm couldn't be written or doesn't already exist in French. Only the aspects of this particular text were determined by certain features of the English language. For instance, certain words were chosen because they rhyme with other words. So for my Capstone project, I wanted to explore the relationship between language, the language in which a text is composed, and the resulting features of the text. I am particularly passionate about short stories, so I wanted to know how one can understand stories written in other languages and how language affects the stories that its corresponding culture writes. So I came up with this research question: how does language in which a text is written determine the creative qualities of a text? In other words, how does the vocabulary of an author's native tongue affect how he writes a story? To try to find an answer, I decided to do a few things. Firstly, to translate a text written in French into English. Secondly, to conduct research in the disciplines that might offer insight into this question. And thirdly, to write an analysis that integrated the perspectives of relevant disciplines and my experience of the translation process to come up with an interdisciplinary and experiential understanding of how language determines creative expression. Today, I'll be explaining what I've learned about the interdisciplinarity of the translation process. First and foremost, translation studies is not itself a discipline. It's a relatively new field comprised of many different theories about the limitations of translation and the best methods for conducting translation. But I was really interested in being more interdisciplinary than just looking at this particular field. So first, let me define translation. Translation is the interpretation of a text from a foreign language into a familiar one. This is a pretty basic definition that I've created by simplifying more specific definitions. For my project, the text was a collection of short stories written by Canadian author Marguerite Anderson titled Court-métrage et instantané, which translates roughly into short films and snapshots. The foreign language was, of course, French, and the familiar language, English. The two disciplines I was mainly concerned with were French and creative writing. However, neither of these is actually considered a discipline. Creative writing can be considered an applied profession or a subdiscipline of literature. French and foreign language studies is a sort of interdiscipline that accompanies the language's literature and cultural anthropology, particularly the subdiscipline of linguistics, which describes different particular aspects of a language, like sound and the grammar and things like that. French can also be considered a part of the applied profession of foreign language education. I integrated the insights offered by creative writing, French, and translation studies, and I'm just going to refer to them as disciplines to keep things simple. Each discipline offers a unique perspective. Foreign language studies believes that knowing the language of a culture can help you to understand that culture. Literature, the perspective of literature is that cultures can be understood through their literature, so by reading text created by a culture, you gain an understanding of that culture. And translation studies offers the view that literature of one language can be understood in a language, another language after it's been translated. The important common ground here is that each of these disciplines is interested in language as it relates to understanding. For all of them, verbal expression is a critical component for understanding peoples and cultures. They also share the idea of interpretation, whether interpreting literature or words, or even using translation as a form of interpretation. All of my chosen disciplines see literature as an important form of expression for different cultures. They also view languages as dynamic and living systems that change between different groups of people and over time. The conflicts arise in understanding literature between different languages. I wanted to evaluate how translation can enable a text to be understood in another language. This involves analyzing how the text is altered by translation and how the text can be understood both in its original language and in the language in which it has been translated. Interestingly, all these disciplines share some methodologies, and this is really helpful in creating an interdisciplinary understanding. The methods I used were translation, which is also a process, but it can be considered a method for understanding literatures of other languages. I used textual analysis to gain a better understanding of the stories I was translating and to really grasp a hold of their meaning, not just the meaning of particular words, but the meaning of the text as a whole. And critical discourse analysis to analyze patterns in the languages to determine stylistic features of the stories and how they related to overall meaning of the effect of the text. One of the most important important concepts of translation studies is the concept of translation lost. Anytime you translate a text from one language into another, the differences between those two languages are going to create a difference in your translation. For example, the word soleil in French means sun, but they don't have the same sound, and they might have different connotations or associations in those languages. So whenever you move a word from one language into another, you're altering it because the sound of the word is going to be different, and the grammatical structure will most likely have to be different too. So anytime that a text is altered, anything that's different in the translated text, this is considered translation lost. So in general, translators aim to reproduce, at the very least, the meaning of the original text, but features other than meaning may also be critical to understanding the text. Like in the Dr. Seuss example, the rhyme and the cadence of the original text were lost in the French translation, and they might be really important because the whole point of the original text is to appeal to children. However, you could translate a text and have some rhyme, but it could be at the expense of losing the exact meaning of the words being translated, or you might have to restructure the grammar of a phrase, which you can't always do because sometimes when you're moving words around to put a rhyming word at the end, you could render the new text incomprehensible by not following the grammatical rules of the language that you're trying to write in. So it's necessary to choose what's most important, staying true to the verbatim meaning of the original text, or retaining other features. Any features that are lost or added along the way, or that give the translator's interpretation some quality that the original text did not have, is translation loss. It's these choices that create the new translation. And in the Dr. Seuss example, we saw what the translation loss was, and that the new translation didn't really have the same features. To make choices about how to interpret the original text of the stories I translated, it was vital to understand the stories both as a part of the literature of the French language and as pieces of creative writing that included artistic choices made by the author. So the interdisciplinary insight I gained, I'm going to call word choice, and I'm going to consider it a concept. Word choice is used by any user of any language when you speak. It just is the rationale that you use to choose the words that you're speaking. In everyday speech, word choice may not be very important because you talk, the words vibrate out, and then they're lost forever. However, in the written word, it's much more enduring. Once you put text on a page, it lasts, it can be shared. So when an author commits words to a page, no matter what language he's writing in, each word must be the right word to convey whatever it is he wishes to communicate. It could be a mood, or a sound, an idea, or a concrete image he wishes to invoke. In French, there's a concept of le mot juste that implies that there is an exact right word to use, and a superior command of the language involves always using the correct word. I'm not suggesting this, but I do believe that a good command of the foreign language, an artistic sensitivity to the meanings, connotations, and sounds suggested by words in any language, and a creative command of the language into which one is translating can be integrated into a strategy for identifying why certain words were chosen in the original text and which words the translator is going to choose. So what I mean by word choice is taking all of that information, what you know about the new language, what you know about creative writing and about an author's intentions, and using that to look at every word and carefully pick what you use in your translation. The bridging strategies I used were reasoning through analogies and thinking across perspectives and disciplines. Matthew Miller and Veronica Bloxman-Cia describe an analogy as involving mapping the properties and relations from one domain onto those of another. You can consider the two different languages, in my case French and English, as the different domains, and the properties and relations as the stylistic features, meanings, and structure of the text you're translating.